Hi, everybody. My name is Martin Willemink. I am co-founder and CEO at Segment, and I'm happy to be here at this new Bytes of Innovation webinar. Bytes of Innovation is a webinar that provides a deep dive into the future of medicine. And we do this together with renowned experts such as researchers, physicians, investors, and lawyers. We do it every other Thursday, so we'll have one today, we'll have one in 2 weeks, and so on. The concept is 15 minutes of presentation by the expert, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A, which is moderated by our Senior Medical Director, Aline Lutz, and by me. So all participants, make sure to put your questions into the chat box so that we can discuss them during the Q&A phase of the presentation. Today, we have Andrew Smith amongst us. And Dr. Smith, he received his MD and his PhD at the Medical College of Ohio. After he completed his diagnostic radiology residency and his abdominal imaging fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic, he became the Director of Radiology Research at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. And now he is the Director of Clinical AI and the Vice Chair of Innovation at UAB Medicine. Besides all of that, Andrew has a very impressive profile because he also founded 2 companies. He founded AI Metrics, which leverages AI and guided clinical workflows to assist with medical image analysis. And he also founded Radiostics, which offers consulting and image interpretation for clinical research organizations. And today, Andrew is going to talk about augmented intelligence in advanced cancer imaging. Andrew, the floor is yours. Let me stop sharing the screen.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I'm happy to be here. Excited to present to you guys a topic that I'm pretty passionate about, augmented intelligence and advanced cancer imaging. And I'll kind of get started here. So as you said, I have a couple roles in companies, and then these are my other disclosures that I'm showing you here. So our learning objectives, we're going to learn how AI can be used to measure, label, and track cancer findings on CT. And we'll learn how augmented intelligence can reduce errors and omissions and improve accuracy, efficiency, and standardization in advanced cancer response evaluation. So in clinical practice, with patients with advanced cancer undergo repeated CT imaging to evaluate response to therapy. So just like this, they have different repeat CT scans, and different radiologists, which are kind of the different colors that are around these, will evaluate the images and dictate findings into separate text-based reports that look something like I'm showing you here. There are many problems with this method. First of all, multiple steps are performed manually. So all reporting is by dictation using voice recognition software, and it's located on a different screen typically than the one we're looking at for the images. And this overall process results in inconsistency, errors, and omissions. And there's kind of loss of longitudinal data with no calculation of tumor burden or percent changes in size like you might want to do if it was a clinical trial. So the text-based reports are relatively ineffective forms of communication. I'll show you a more effective form by the end of this talk. And finally, the entire process is relatively inefficient. So here are some examples of radiology reports kind of blown up. Very blown up are the conclusions or impressions from those. So the abdominal report on the left says there's slight increase in size of multiple liver metastases, and borderline enlarged retroperitoneal lymph nodes are unchanged. No new sites of disease, and the large volume of ascites is unchanged. And if we look at the same patient, the chest report on the right says the lung nodule metastases are unchanged and no new metastatic disease. So collectively, this is a patient, a single patient. It sounds like these reports are describing relatively stable disease. We'll come back to this later on as an example. So next up, we're going to talk about augmented intelligence and advanced cancer imaging. So first of all, artificial intelligence, what is that referring to? That's incorporating like human level intelligence into machines. So when we say artificial intelligence, we usually mean something like machine learning or deep learning that completes a narrow task that humans do well, like measuring a tumor or detection of an image finding. Augmented intelligence then is the use of artificial intelligence to improve human performance. So this requires an integrated system where the AI actually benefits the human, ideally in multiple ways. So that poses the question, what should we set for goals for augmented intelligence? In the cancer imaging, so doing this for cancer, I would want this to be able to increase accuracy. That's accuracy of reporting, accuracy of measurements. It needs to increase precision and standardization. Ideally, it improves the efficiency of the radiologist, and it should decrease major errors or omissions, things that we might forget to follow up on. And then lastly, it should improve the clarity of communication. So to do this, tasks that are currently manual need to be more automated, and the AI will need to be integrated into a system that is simple to use. So let's talk about that. Let's imagine an augmented intelligence image viewer. It would have guided workflows. These are efficient and adhere to best practice standards for evaluation of advanced cancer. So the user interface would guide the radiologist through the process. And then ideally, it would call for various AI algorithms. These are examples where the AI would help with tumor measurements, tumor anatomic labeling, and tumor tracking over time. And then finally, this would be combined with automated reports that include like a graph, a table, key images, and structured text. And these would be automatically generated, ideally with limited to no dictation and no loss of data, because when you dictate, you can lose data when it goes through the system. So we're going to compare several steps of advanced cancer analysis, standard of care, and then look at it from an augmented intelligence perspective and see how we can improve upon that. So here's an example of the standard of care for target lesion measurement and labeling. These are the cancer findings we need to measure and label. So the radiologist manually measures this liver mass and then manually identifies or dictates the anatomic location. And so this all goes into a text-based report, and it could look something like this. The anatomic location and measurements can be described many different ways. So this would be like 4 different readers looking at the same thing. They're all looking at the same images, but there's a lack of standardization. So the process is similar for lymph nodes. So that was for a mass that's in an organ, and a lymph node is separate. And notice all the different ways to describe the anatomic location and measurements for this lymph node. So the anatomy is in red, and the green is the measurement. So there's different ways to describe that and lack of standardization. So the problems are with this method. One, it's relatively inefficient. A lot of radiologists think this is efficient because they're dictating very fast, but there are faster ways than dictation to handle this information. And it has relatively low accuracy and precision in terms of the measurements and how we're handling. There's low inter-observer agreement, and it's prone to data transfer error. So that is when I dictate 1.3 centimeter, like this says here, and it writes 3.3, and I don't notice that data transfer error. And then in general, there's a lack of standardization. So this can be improved. So we're going to do that with augmented intelligence. We're going to take a quick little video here that I'll show you where AI-assisted segmentation, which is a way to measure things with AI, and then automatic extraction of that measurement. And then there's AI structured anatomic labeling. So let's kind of take a look. Here's an example. The user simply clicks on the lesion to activate AI segmentation. Once this is accepted, a second AI algorithm presents the anatomy in a tree-based structure that you're seeing here. So the process works well for masses and for lymph nodes. So I'm about to do a lymph node here. Notice the lymph node intensity is very similar to the background. It zooms in. It's easy to edit that segmentation if we needed to do so. And here again is that anatomy displayed in a tree-based structure that's very consistent. So every reader would do this the same way and use a consistent list. And it's actually faster to click, right? You can't dictate faster than you can click. So this thing has several different things that are improved. It's 2 times faster actually than dictating. It has higher accuracy and precision in terms of the measurements because you're using AI, which contributes to higher inter-observer agreement. And then there's elimination of data transfer. So all this digital data doesn't need to go through your voice and goes directly into the report. And this process is overall improved standardization. So this is a piece of the puzzle. And let's look at some of the other pieces. So back to standard of care. Let's look at target lesion tracking. That is to say, finding a target lesion at follow-up. So there's a prior exam and a current exam, and we're trying to track this down. That's done manually. And the process is more complex when you're working with a trainee or assistant who's also dictated a report. And we'll cover that a little bit more in a moment. So this process has multiple problems. It's kind of tedious and inefficient to manually track down something that had previously been found on a prior imaging. And that this is prone to errors where you might find the wrong lesion, and omissions where you might not bother to find a lesion that was previously found because it's not forced upon you to do so in standard of care. So this is kind of poorly standardized and leads to loss of longitudinal data that would normally be captured in clinical trials. So let's kind of compare that. with augmented intelligence here. There's AI-guided tracking of all target lesions. So the prior exam's on the right, and it's displaying the lesion, helping us find it on the current exam on the left. And I segmented it with AI, and here I'm just making a slight adjustment to that, showing you how easy it is to make those adjustments. So the radiologist does this without having to look up data in a prior report. That's what's done in standard care. I read the prior report and I say, okay, it looks like they measured this liver lesion. I don't need to do that anymore. So the radiologist gets to keep their eyes on the images the entire time. The report is essentially in the images. So this is the concept of a workflow that guides the radiologist. We force the radiologist to have to follow up on these findings that were previously evaluated. So you can't forget to measure something using this system is what I'm trying to say. So there's a lot of benefits to this. You know, it's simple and it's very efficient. Again, that 2 times faster kind of concept. There's a reduction in errors and we eliminate these omissions. You can't forget to do something because you're forced to do it in the system. So that improves standardization across different radiologists and across different centers. And there's a lot of other benefits. We'll kind of get to those. Let's talk about non-target lesions. This is standard of care. Non-target lesions are cancer findings we don't measure because they're too small, too numerous, or fluid or cystic. So for the standard care, we have to read the prior report that I'm showing you here and manually detect the non-target lesions on the current exam. That's how it's done in standard of care. And this is followed by like a free-form dictation of the changes from the prior exam. And there are a variety of ways to do this, which leads to a lack of standardization that we see here. So again, this tracking and reporting of non-target lesions is inefficient. The process is, again, prone to errors and omissions, just like it was for target lesions. And there's this lack of standardization, both in the approach to doing it as well as the language. And the entire process completely deviates from clinical trials, where in clinical practice, you're completely free-form, while in trials, you put things into specific buckets for how you determine response of a non-target lesion. So let's take a look at that in augmented intelligence. We're going to bring over the best of clinical trials, but into a system that makes it easy to do. So non-target lesions are tracked using AI. So very similar to the targets, it'll display the non-target lesion on the prior, take you to approximately the location, and then you will pick from a set list of choices rather than having unlimited choices and non-standardization. So it kind of forces you to do things in a standardized process. And there's benefits to this. So here's an example of what this might do. You would very much be standardized in how you're describing these lung nodules, liver lesions, et cetera, and lymph nodes and so forth. So the benefits are that this is simple and efficient. Again, with same words I'm using over here, reduces errors, eliminates these omissions where you can't forget to follow up on something. And the process is more standardized with the guided workflows that essentially adhere to clinical trial methodology. So let's talk about like the reporting aspects of cancer. So the purpose of the report is to improve communication between the radiologist and the oncologic provider, and between the oncologic provider and the patient. For standard of care, these text-based reports are derived from a combination of templates and voice recognition software, like I'm showing you here, and a variety of methods are used. And the impression or conclusion is almost always free-form. So you can standardize all the top, but then ultimately the final impression is sort of free-form. So this manual process, I would argue, is inefficient and prone to errors. Again, there's a lack of standardization, particularly for that impression. And there's really low reporting accuracy. That is to say that the image transferred to the oncologic provider and patients is suboptimal. The radiologist is thinking I'm transferring this is stable disease, but the oncologic provider and patient may be hearing something different. So there's relatively low inter-observer agreement then between the radiologist and the oncologic provider. And this process deviates from clinical trial methods, which were used to approve all cancer drugs. So it's kind of funny that when we do in clinical practice is widely different from what we do in clinical trials. So I would say this is overall a poor form of communication, that our current reports that we've been doing this way for 20 or 30 years could be improved upon. So with augmented intelligence, the reports are fully automated, and they might look more like this, like with the graph, probably some key images of the targets, non-targets, and other findings, and ultimately with a table. This is much more crystal clear. And the funny thing is with augmented intelligence, these are generated in like half a second where you don't have to dictate them. They're just automatically computed, including percent changes and so forth. So it's highly efficient. and it has higher reporting accuracy and inter-observer agreement than dictated text reports. So these automated reports are highly standardized. They include, as we said, a calculation of tumor burden. You can see percent changes on the graphical report. And there's non-target lesion response, final overall response, et cetera. So this conforms to clinical trial methods that were used to approve the cancer drugs like we talked about, and it's a much more highly effective form of communication that oncologic providers actually prefer. Now, what we haven't yet done, but is fairly trivial for us to be able to do, these reports are digitized. You didn't have to dictate them. So there's no reason you couldn't convert the digitized data into any other language. So in other words, you could read in English and export in Spanish or a different language, or you could adapt to address low health literacy. That is to say, bring the information down to like a 5th grade level. I would say the report displayed on the screen is not 5th grade level, but we could do that if we chose to do so and make it a little easier for patients to understand that. So let's kind of compare. Remember those standard of care reports earlier from the chest and abdominal radiologists. This is, if we take another look at the language, slight increase in size of multiple liver mets, unchanged lung nodules, by comparison, the augmented intelligence report on the right is clear. The calculations of response to disease is fully automated and highly standardized. And this is actually from the same patient. So the one on the left sort of suggests stable disease, but we can see over time that this patient has grown, the tumor burden has grown and actually triggers progressive disease. So I would ask you, which one of these would you want for your loved one or for your friend or family and so forth? I would definitely want the one on the right, and that we've seen consistently from people in terms of the response of what they'd like. So this adheres to clinical trial standards. It is a patient level report. Those on the left are separate chests and abdomen. You don't need to do that. We can solve that now with technology where it's a patient level report, even if there are separate radiologists contributing to that report. So what about reading with a trainee? This is standard of care when you're reading with a trainee. And the process, you have to look at a prior report, a current report. It takes a long time to do this. Let me just and it's tedious and inefficient to be able to do this with a trainee. We can actually speed that up with augmented intelligence. So the attending reviews the trainee's measurements and annotation in the actual images. There is no separate report to read. I don't need to read a prior report. I don't need to read the resident's report. Their report is essentially in the images. So I'm checking their target lesions here. I'm about to check their non-target lesions following this. And you can even enter non-cancer findings, which forces people to follow up on things. So if you found a DVT or a colitis on the prior, you can force follow up of that on the next one. So this is the end of the non-target lesions here. You still get the same report. This is not doing the entire report, but the cancer findings could be completed in less than a minute in this kind of system. So it's simple and efficient and very fun to be able to do this. This process is highly validated. I'm going to kind of push through this pretty quickly, where we did a multi-institutional comparing to standard of care and improved accuracy, reduced errors. It was twice as fast, and inter-observer agreement was increased. Ultimately, the radiologist and the oncologist preferred this kind of a workflow. And this workflow with AI allows you to capture radiomics. So now the radiologists, the experts, are segmenting the tumors, which takes radiomics to a next level. We actually have experts segmenting it. So now, and potentially doing this across all patients. So that really boosts the ability to do radiomics. You could potentially also evaluate body composition at the same time that you're doing, in a fully automated way, at the same time that you're doing your reads for cancer. And then other reads are possible, not to go into too much detail, but you could do things like cancer staging, LIRADS, BIRADS, PIRADS, et cetera. This is a mock-up of a LIRADS report where, again, the system would walk the user through this process and standardize the reports to a great extent. I expect to see that in 2023. So in conclusion, I highlighted augmented intelligence, or the use of AI to improve radiology performance. We discussed construction of an augmented intelligence viewer that uses guided workflows, AI, and automated reporting. We compared to the standard of care to augmented intelligence with numerous benefits for augmented intelligence. We talked about the advantages of these advanced reports. The system's been extremely well validated in a multi-institutional fashion. And we discussed applications of augmented intelligence to other cancer applications, just briefly mentioning LIRADS as an example. So overall, augmented intelligence and advanced cancer response evaluation with AI metrics, this solution has established a new standard of care. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate the time. Thank you for listening. happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. That was, well, quite a presentation. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. So I see there are many advantages of augmented intelligence for advanced cancer, improving accuracy, improving clarity on the reports. I think, well, as a suggestion, because I'm a big fan of health economics and outcomes research, I think like a cost effectiveness would summarize all of these into a number. So how is augmented intelligence compares to the standard of care? So I have two questions. One, if you have any knowledge about the cost effectiveness of augmented intelligence for advanced cancer or other fields in radiology, and also how is the current implementation, or whether are hospitals adopting it, or is it very new, and how do you see and how are hospitals going to buy in? Yeah.
So the cost-effective analysis is always relative to a group. So who is the relative group? So we haven't formally done this, but if you're making radiologists twice as fast for a particular task that's commonly done, I mean, half of a radiology department at any one moment is reading CT scans, and oncology is a really big part of that. So making them twice as fast has a very nice return on investment to the radiology department. And then it's possible that these reports save a little bit of time in the clinic for the patients when the oncologist talks to the patient. If it's not saving time, it's certainly making the results more clear. I'd be curious to do a trial of standard of care versus AI, everything else the same, and you might actually see improved survival just because of the improved standardization. That's just a hypothesis at this point, but something I would like to test. You were getting at then after that saying, how far along are we? It's still pretty early phase. These things are actively used in clinical trials at the moment. It is now clinical practice ready. So FDA cleared, integrated with your work list, integrated with PowerScribe. Those are like key metrics that we're essentially now announcing in RSNA 2022. So ready for clinical practice. And there are a couple groups that are pretty interested in getting started on that. So that's kind of the state of development, more focused on advanced cancer, but I was trying to insinuate that it can go broader than that in the future with cancer staging and some of the other applications like lung rads and LIRADs and so forth.
Great. Yeah, makes sense. I think this already answers Michelle's question. That was what needs to happen to roll this out to the medical community more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's just it. So well, that is, it's but mostly answered, which is integration. You have to have this simple to use, fully integrated. It's the radiologist that uses this. So in our world, that means it needs to be integrated with your PACS system, with your EMR, with your work list, and with your dictation system. And so those things were not previously completed, but now are. So that was the limiting factor to when we get asked, why are you not in clinical practice? Those kind of things are needed. It's not just about FDA clearance. You got to get it to the point where it's really easy to use and radiologists are happy to use it.
And Louis is asking about tumors with different densities. So you showed us segmentation. So how would different densities would be handled by the system?
So this particular system works with CT or MRI. So kind of attenuation or density on CT and then an intensity on MRI. And it was trained by like humans annotating the images. So sometimes we get asked, how does it know where the edges of a tumor are? Well, you could say, how does a human know where the edges of the tumor are? So, but the point is it's trained on human data. I think the active version was trained on about 40,000 labeled tumors. We've since labeled it 75,000. To my knowledge, that is a world record. So and I would estimate that a human radiologist would maybe measure 100,000 tumors in their lifetime. So that's kind of one of our goals, is to get to about 100,000 tumors and have that kind of power in a simple AI algorithm. It's really a simple algorithm, just one tool in the tool bucket that we need for evaluating cancer is segmentation. So it does work pretty well. And you can subtrain it. Our next version may be subtrained on where, in other words, we first identify that this is a lymph node, and then we call for the lymph node algorithm versus a lung algorithm, et cetera. So you can get it very, very narrow, and presumably that would improve the accuracy as well.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, first of all, I wanted to thank you for a great presentation. This is super interesting, and I'm already looking forward to the SABI conference where you're going to give a similar talk, and probably many more similar topics will be discussed. I see there's an additional question just coming in. Is there a new file standard or format made to handle all this information?
Yes. So right now we actually use a custom format. Some people are proposing DICOM structured reports. At least that would help handle some of the text aspects. But honestly, as you saw that report, the kind of graphical report, that's not really a text-based thing. That could be a DICOM wrapped PDF file that could go into PACS or into the EMR. And sometimes we do secondary captures, which is another form of a file that can go into the PACS and be viewed in the PACS. But the PDF is probably the key. I want this in the fingertips of the oncologic provider in their EMR. And ideally, the patients have direct access to it is the long-term goal.
Got it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Oh, another question coming in from Matt. Does this software take other patient factors into account, such as age, smoker, etc., when making these predictions, or are all patients treated the same way?
So right now we don't do the radiomics, which would be the predictive aspects. So you could look at patient factors and you can incorporate in imaging factors to predict outcomes. We haven't gotten in directly into that, but we have people who use it to make their own algorithms to do that. So that's kind of the future, is we're providing the pickaxe for you to be able to make those algorithms and do that. And if we have some that are highly successful, of course, we'd want to incorporate it into the product as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess this is a first step. You got to start somewhere, of course.
That's right. First, you have to annotate the data to be able to answer this. But now you can annotate live in clinical practice with radiology experts doing the annotation. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I wanted to ask you one question myself, actually, that ties a little bit to what Luis was asking about the, like the different segmentations of different kinds of tumors. So you also mentioned that the inter-observer agreement is pretty suboptimal, right? You showed some results of different observers and they all came up with slightly different results. So in my experience, it's very hard to define a ground truth if there is no good, reliable inter-observer variability. How do you handle this? Do you see this as a big problem or not?
Yeah. So it depends what you're trying to assess with inter-observer agreement. So kind of easy to do with segmentations. You can do correlation coefficients, Bland-Altman plots, dice scores, and these cool things. Then when it comes to it depends what you're trying to standardize. In the case of the graph on the top right here, it's showing inter-observer agreement at the level of the oncologists, 4 oncologists reading the same report. And what are they understand? What was the radiologist saying? We had the radiologist bucket into one of 4 responses, their text-based reports or the AI report, and then the oncologist hearing that. Ideally, those match up. The radiologist is saying progressive disease, and the oncologist is hearing that. So that was fairly easy for us to standardize and put into a trial. But there are other aspects that, like you said, that are hard to standardize. And what is the gold standard? In our case, I would probably argue that clinical trial methods are the gold standard, that if we can get closer to that, where that's how the drugs were approved. And if we can bring that technology or method to clinical practice, that's probably going to improve our ability to communicate with our oncologic providers and patients, and ideally lead to improved patient care.
Got it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And by the way, next week at SABI, Dr. Mastro de Casa from Stanford and we will give a roundtable session around ground truth determination and all the inter-observer variability aspects and things like that. So if people want to learn more about that and they go to SABI, then make sure to attend our roundtable. Well, Andrew, again, it was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I think we all learned a lot. At least I learned a lot. I'm looking forward to all the things that you are developing together with your research group and with your companies. So really, really great work. So thanks, Andrew. Thanks everybody else for attending this session. And in 2 weeks, November 3rd, we will have Eric Ranchard. He is the former president of USOMI, European Society of Medical Imaging Informatics. So I'm all looking forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks.